that one of the reasons why we have the debates as we would have just experienced here in our class, and notwithstanding everyone's point was quite valid, it's not to say that at all, but the reason why we have to make these sentiments is because decisions are made on our behalf with respect to where the arts and culture are placed in terms of policy, engagement, and direction, because there is a lack of understanding as to the interconnections between the arts and culture and whatever may be those other sectors that we wish it to interface with and development. And I am arguing that the reason why we do not understand those interconnections with development is because we still lack an appreciation, an intrinsic understanding about the role that measuring and how we are to measure and what is to be measured and why we measure in relation to how these entities that fall under the arts and culture do indeed make a difference to our development pathways. Was that clear now?
Yes, miss.
Oh gosh. So we heard it. All right, great. So the thing is, today's class is looking at measuring, not just in terms of being able to understand how we measure or what we measure. We will certainly get to that. But we also will discuss how we arrived at measuring and why measuring is important. And it is my hope that in us going through this lecture, you having an eye opener and an understanding as to the way in which we construct measuring where the global creative economy is concerned, we may have an appreciation for how we arrive sometimes at the policy prescription that we do. One of the challenges is that sometimes those who are doing these things on our behalf, it's a matter of, and I like to say this, some of you have taught before, you know, you've heard me say this, they don't know, and they don't know that they don't know. And the irony of that is that measuring is about knowing. Measuring is knowing. If you measure, you will know. So if it is that we are not measuring and we don't understand the role that that is to play in relation to our development praxis, where the arts and culture are concerned, then of course we will have much of the dilemma that we see ourselves faced with, where our stakeholders are not necessarily in agreement with, nor are they clear about why we may have placed the sectors into the policy constructs that we have done quite recently. If everyone has heard that, please raise your hand. You'll have to keep giving me feedback so that I'll know that I'm not dropping in and out. Awesome. Great. I don't know if all of you know, but I will have to watch the time today because this is my main area of research, and I am willing to admit that I am extremely passionate about it. When I started doing this work, it would have been with Dr. Keith Nurse, and I would have entered it through the lens as a social scientist. I must confess to those of you who may not know my CV, I don't have any training in the arts and culture whatsoever. I am not as lucky as you all, but I do find myself blessed to have found myself working within that domain. I believe the arts and culture offers some of the greatest assets to humankind. And I always say to my students that you're among the brightest at the university because you are not only required to create, but you also have to be thinkers and analysts. And my colleagues like myself in social science, we would have just been asked to think and analyze and not necessarily to be creative or even to be introspective about creativity. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the things that would have affected the fact that we didn't always measure the arts and culture. So that's the first point that I want to put to you all, that what you see across the region is not to be scoffed at, because we must remember that we are inherited spaces. If you can appreciate what I mean when I say by inherited spaces. We didn't just arrive, we didn't open our eyes and see ourselves here, but we were brought here, we were forced here. And with that came other people's nuances and idiosyncrasies. And one of the things about the rest of the world at one particular point in time is that because the arts and culture were seen as fun, or if we go back to Adorno's sentiment about the arts and culture, as simply for aesthetic purpose to be valued and enjoyed, then why in heaven's name would we even be trying to measure them? Why would you want to measure a day at the beach? For some people that would sound so strange, but for someone like myself, I could measure a day at the beach because I'm gonna measure up the gas it takes to go there. I'm gonna count the bacon short. I'm gonna even try to count the number of people on the beach. I'm gonna look at the time spent. I'm gonna try to figure out peak times, and I'm going to come to a conclusion that Maracas Bay and Maracas Beach is an important part of Trinidad and Tobago's, not only its natural heritage, but definitely to its creative and cultural ecosystem. But there was a time when that would have been seen as something not to do. Like, why are you wasting your time? And I'm saying to you, class, that that sentiment about the arts and culture is not something that was born here. That is what it was all over the world. And as a matter of fact, today, apart from in the Caribbean, it is safe to say that it is not every single country in the world that consistently measures its creative economy. So that Adorno's idea about the arts and culture as fun is something that influenced the first ideas in terms of academic approaches to understanding cultural value beyond simply philosophizing on it, as the way in which Raymond Williams and they would have done. And so as we go through the lecture as well, you might appreciate why Throsby, who is a cultural economist, would have taken time to make the arguments that he has to show you why it is, from a philosophical standpoint, that we could safely speak about a cultural economy in terms of cultural value and the idea of supply and demand, so that in that way he would have justification, or to be able to offer a justification as to why we measure. Everybody good so far with what I've said?
Yes, miss.
Yes, miss.
Great.
Yes, miss.
So it's really only until the early 1960s that some kind of engagement in terms of measuring the arts and culture began to emerge, but it didn't generate any special interest at first. A lot of what was used was what we would call poor and underdeveloped rubrics, things that were generally used in economics to measure other things like perhaps energy and construction and oil, because we know back in those days oil would have been a big deal across the world. And quite naturally, as we know of the arts and culture class, a lot of those instruments and a lot of those measurement frameworks would have been inappropriate for the arts, because, of course, the arts and culture is a different kind of animal, so to speak. In fact, there were some that didn't even see the linkages at all. And that one draws from the Adorno argument. Culture is culture, and that is to be left to the sociologists and the anthropologists to go off somewhere and study how the natives live. And as a matter of fact, that is how we arrived at that Oxford Standard Dictionary meaning of culture, a way of life. It would have come out of an anthropologic understanding about culture that had nothing necessarily to do with economics or socioeconomics. And so there was a school of thought that really did not cater to culture having any linkages whatsoever to economics. And then thirdly, there were difficulties in measuring economics in terms of the cultural industries. And we still have this in the region. I don't know how many of you know this, but when we measure the cultural industries, what that is seen as for classical or macroeconomists is anecdotal because it does not use the rubric that is used to measure other spheres of the economy that would then allow for those activities to fall into the balance of payments that the central bank would count it. I don't know how many of you have ever seen those kinds of statements, but you can easily Google it, GDP of Trinidad and Tobago, or Google balance of payments of Trinidad and Tobago, or sectors that generate value added to Trinidad and Tobago according to the central bank. And you would so see that the things that are there are things like oil and gas, construction. You will even see they usually refer to something called minerals, and you might even see something nondescript. Like I know sometimes they like to put things like butter, lard, and some other kind of craziness like that. Some kind of very basic, generic category that one finds across the world in terms of central bank statistical measuring. And the reason for that, the reason why the arts and culture tend to be omitted from those frameworks is because they say that the arts and culture don't operate like real economic goods and services. The thing is, class, the arts and culture are like your electricity or your cable or your internet, which is that if I consume it, it does not preclude any one of you from consuming it. If I listen to a song, that does not stop Jillian or Tonya or Antonia or Ava from listening to it, does it? And if you watch a movie, it doesn't stop me from watching it. Whereas normal economic goods and services, if you if you have a beverage, I can't have the same beverage. You've consumed it. And so the arts and culture basically operate like how electricity and what they like to call public goods operate, except that it's not a public good in that sense. It belongs to someone. And as we would have learned from Omari last week, in it belonging to someone, that person has a right to generate returns from it. And so this is what causes the dilemma at the macro level for our institutions in the region charged with measuring to measure our cultural and creative industries. I am not making an excuse for them because, as you will soon see, the rest of the world certainly made sure to find ways to overcome that challenge. And in that regard, we can say that there are three waves of perspectives on measuring that has emerged from when they started in the middle of the 1960s to date. The first would have been hinged on these two pioneering papers, Baumol and Bowen, where they were very much intrigued by what was happening. Um, it's called Westin in London, and what's it called in New York? Broadway. They were very much intrigued by the way in which actors started to operate in a very structured and uniform way. And if I recall correctly, I stand to be corrected, someone can check it. I believe by this time in the 1960s, the guilds had become organized. Another challenge that we have in the region, we do have artist associations, but we still have not really evolved to guilds. A guild makes a difference. Does anybody know how a guild would operate different to an association? Can anyone tell me?
A guild will do training.
A guild would do training. What else would a guild do?
Would have a management board.
Right? And what would that management board be interested in besides training? What would they see themselves to be focused on? Anybody knows?
Earning
What?
money.
That's right. If you think about the Writers Guild in the US or the Actors Guild, if the guild say don't work, you can't work, you know. And by the same token, if the guilds say, well, this is what you have to pay us, and they have the list and their categories, this is what it is. And so because of those structures, that allow Beaumont and Boeing to look at the performing arts from an economic standpoint, using what they were earning. They used their macroeconomic formula and theory to explore whether or not artists were being justifiably paid, if they were being properly compensated for their labor. Can you imagine that? Wouldn't you all like if an economist did that? And so they used economics to make that case. And that is, and it is, see, it is this kind of work, this early form of measuring that allowed for creatives in the US, because this is where this would have emerged from initially, right? To settle down as workers, as bona fide workers, being paid for their labor and their creativity. So these two papers were pioneering in the sense that one, they started the ball rolling or measuring in a serious way in terms of looking at the economics of the arts and culture, but also through their contribution would have allowed for a more serious engagement with the idea of the creators' work as a labor and not just is work for somebody's entertainment and just because they love to do it. Yes, they love to do it, but they want to be justifiably compensated for what they love to do, just as anyone else in another career. There was another element that occurred within that wave around that time now. Remember, by this time now, we're operating as industry for much of the arts and culture. Certainly, we would have been able to talk about a music industry by that time, a film industry, Hollywood would have been bubbling, a publishing industry, magazines, newspapers, book publishing would have been a big deal, and we would have had some related industries emerging by then, because by that time now we have telephone, we have gramophone, we have television, and all these things. And so the idea of copyright by that time had become something of interest. And so we started to see across the global landscape certain countries. Netherlands was one that jumped out early, the USA, somewhere in Europe. I always forget which country it is in Europe. I know Austria did a very early study. So in the 1970s, because of the formation of WIPO as well, we started to see attention being given to the impact of copyright from an economic standpoint. But that really started to get going somewhere in the 1980s. But we definitely started to see that strand of work emerging in that first wave. By the time of the second wave, we started to see those connections between culture and economics being explored more. And there's Hendon and Shanahan, who would have looked at economic policy for the arts. Ruth Towles would have given her attention to developing and justifying the idea of a field called cultural economics, along with the same Bowman and Bowen. And she also gave her attention a lot to the economics of copyright As a matter of fact, I refer to her quite a bit in my doctorate when I did it. She did a lot of early work. One of her outstanding publications is a 2-volume compendium called Cultural Economics that I believe was, I think it's Sage. If it's not Sage that published it, it's Elsevier. I don't know if you're familiar with that publishing house, but they publish a lot of textbooks and journals. And then in the 80s and 90s, we saw the research shifting more to impasse because by this time now, policy was being created in a serious way, and we'll get to that shortly. And because policy was being created in a serious way, governments needed to measure to justify these policy directions that were being taken. Class, you can appreciate that it is somewhere in this time now that the world started to take off and leave us. Whilst the developing world was still not understanding the importance of measuring the arts and cultural endeavors, the rest of the world now recognized that they had no choice but to because of how their structures of governance operate. If money is being put policy wise into something, well, you got to measure it because you have to be able to justify to Congress, as in the case of the US, and your parliament, and to your population, why is it that you are spending all this money in creating these policy frameworks for the advancement of the arts and culture now as industry. And so impact assessment began to be very important during the 80s and the 90s. At the same time, too, artist associations were developing beyond the guild construct. We then now started to see, for example, Recording Industry Association, for example, of America. We began to see, for example, the Intellectual Property Alliance. We also have out there all of the copyright societies that are bound together over the under the global group. And then, of course, there's also the one that watches piracy, Piracy Watch. So all of these various bodies and groups now, non-governmental organizations, also turn to measuring as a way to make the case and advocate to governments the importance of measuring the sector that it could have its rightful place within policy and be given the injection of capital that it needed. Intellectual property then became a big deal within this, but of course, that became even more of a big deal by the third wave when digitalization really began to take root. So we can say, class, that it is somewhere within the second wave that we saw the rest of the world start to leave us in terms of their beginning to have a better appreciation and a greater understanding for the importance of measuring. And why were they measuring? This is what now I use as my point to again respond to the first argument I made when class started, because they needed to show how indeed the arts and culture was contributing to development. It isn't enough to say that it's important to our population or important to the advancement of society. And if we ever take time to look into the manifestos of the various political parties across the region, you'll see that culture usually gets a paragraph. So, Patria and girl, I don't know why you surprised it is what it is. But, and that paragraph never really goes beyond that understanding of culture connecting to development in a very blanket kind of way. There's never an interrogation of what development actually means. What is development in terms of human resource capacity building? What is development in terms of foreign exchange? What does development mean in terms of infrastructure? What does development mean in terms of your image of your country and how that all connects to the arts and culture, for example? So that by the third wave now, we started to see where perspectives wanted to drill down more into these issues. Not to be left out by now would be the Caribbean and other parts of the developing world. And I suppose one can say that with intellectual property becoming part of trade, becoming interconnected with trade, and the fact that you had to become, as they call it, TRIPS compliant, it would have opened the eyes of a lot of developing economies as to the need now to foster and to harness the growth of the arts and culture into cultural industries more. And of course, if you're going to do that, then you have to measure. Our challenge, though, in this part of the world is that we don't see measuring as something that is to consistently happen every year because we always think about the costs. So that we've moved from a place where we no longer see it as not important, but we are now at a place where we don't see it as that important, that it would have that attention on an annual basis, just as how we measure oil and gas and manufacturing and tourism and so forth. So perhaps now, class, you might appreciate why I would be one who I don't necessarily have a problem with the interconnection that has been made. This is one of my reasons, because now the arts and culture will get some more attention in a more on a more consistent basis. The frameworks of tourism have already been set up in a particular way that require that annual frequent assessment. And so falling there now in that domain, it means that they cannot be left out. That is one. I would like some views and responses on that. Anyone can go. Anyone has a comment? Yes, Donna.
I guess this is more of a question to you and everyone then.
Yes.
Because if we're seeing, right, that connecting arts and culture with tourism is more beneficial to culture because, tourism is a more established industry and whatnot, so it will allow you to have more of a structural basis for also including culture in that. But wouldn't you also say then that only specific aspects of culture and the arts will be integrated into that aspect because they will be looking at it through the lens of tourism, for instance?
Indeed, I will not disagree with that at all.
Mm.
To even say to you, no, that don't mean that, I would be lying, and I can't lie. Indeed. Anyone else wants to comment on Tanya's question? Which, of course, is a very nice rhetorical question, and I appreciate. I do agree with her. Anyone else cares to comment? Go again? Yes.
I don't know if I sit here and I thinking that we're saying that yes, it makes sense for the two entities to be together, but from my standpoint in Trinidad and Tobago, I don't think even tourism is gets its fair share. So I'm sitting here and telling myself to put the two ministries together that they don't really see or they don't pay attention to at all. I just sitting here and so that's how I see that. I don't even think we see, well, they see tourism as, I mean, on paper they say yes to tourism and whatever, but I don't think we ever really spend the time and the energy behind it as well. So it's like they put the two bad seed in a corner and that's it. To me, I don't know.
Anyone else? Yes, Patreon, go ahead. I'm not disagreeing with you because they're just allowing you all to speak. Go ahead, Patreon.
I agree with both Tanya and Kwasi. With reference to what Tanya said, she is actually correct because putting, like, I am not totally against it, but putting culture together with tourism. Now, yes, culture is going to get the exposure. It's going to get one aspect of it is going, or some aspects of it actually is going to come to the forefront. But there's that important intrinsic thing that Trinidad has that is not going to come to the forefront. That thing that actually has the
And
that community
right,
cohesion that is getting dwarfed because that
right.
comes from the arts,
So
right? But the
I think in a sense we're talking about two different things.
yeah, and
What I am talking about that will get the attention is not what y'all are talking about. I am talking about it in the context of this class. Where's Jamie?
I'm here.
When was the last time the arts and cultures, cultural industries or cultural economy was measured? At the time,
2014, we did a mapping exercise.
who did that one?
Culture Division did that through Dr. Burke, I think it was, yes.
Right, and I did one a little bit
We
before.
did one a little after, shortly after, I think, yeah.
Oh, I did one after that.
I think it was after that. Yeah.
Oh, she do math and I did measuring.
Yes.
Right.
Mhm.
Y'all here, right? What year we in now?
2020. See,
Right.
I'm refraining from commenting because um
Yes. No, I don't want you to go. Don't say anything beyond Rob because we're recorded and I will. If you
yeah.
all I could always email you. I don't have to put up this lecture necessarily. I can email it to you all or try to. I could probably send it as a transfer.
You see,
But
the actuality, the theory behind it is fine. Everything
mhm,
practical, yes, but the actuality, that is not the reality. It definitely isn't the reality. And as Kwasi said, tourism already was one of the, we are considered, quote unquote, we're not a real ministry. That was culture before, culture and the arts. Now they put us with another not a real ministry, so to speak, right? So when you combine the two of us, you would expect that yes, maybe we could combine forces and do something and bring ourselves to the forefront and be measure what is needs to be measured because we do see the importance of measuring. The problem is, again, just like Antonia would have mentioned earlier when she was discussing it, there are other boxes we have to tick, and they prefer to tick those boxes. And those boxes do not include the measurement aspect. If we're speaking specifically about measuring um, culture.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. And I appreciate all of what is being said. So let us go on, and I believe we are going to be able to answer all of what we're saying for ourselves here. Once more, I am not disagreeing at all. Right? We go in again. So we notice from this third wave here that the rest of the world started to drill down into some other things like creative clustering and culture value chain. Dr. Burke has done work on this area. I don't know if the government speaks from a policy standpoint about us having clusters here in Trinidad and Tobago. But I do know that across the region, we have variously had analysis done in terms of value chain and what have you.
Dr. Tug Creative TT would look at clusters. That's they accept it. You too.
Right, right. I was trying to remember because I think I remember this young lady who I taught who runs creative. She's music TT. I
Yes,
remember.
Melissa
Yeah,
Jimenez. Yes, his music
remember
teacher. Yes.
something to that effect.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. So we're going again. Again, class, remember what I said early on. I hope my voice didn't dip then. I say they don't know, and they don't know that they don't know. And measuring is knowing. Just remember that. And the other thing that I said was that one of the challenges to my mind when I look at our circumstance is that we are yet to understand how these interconnections that we try to make between the arts and culture and other sectors of our economy, how that links back to development. And I am arguing that it is because we don't understand the importance of measuring. Needless to say, though, out of those three waves, when we came to a particular point by the end of the 1990s, these were the five things that we were clear about where the cultural industries were concerned and their connection to the global economy. One, that they would create value added in your economy. And yes, there's a way to measure that. Australia would have been one of the first ones to do that. Yes, they generate a high rate of gross domestic product, or what we call GDP. That is how you measure your foreign exchange. And we know this because of Carnival. That is one of the most obvious examples for Trinidad and Tobago, right? But for the rest, for Jamaica, for example, it would be dancehall, for example. And of course, we know that the cultural industries can generate employment and high levels of employment. They potentially have the characteristics of leading sectors that generate overall economy. And what we mean by leading sector is that they tend to generate growth in other sectors. So that it is because of the arts and culture across the world that other sectors that deal with lifestyle goods and services, cars, sometimes clothes, and there are certain sectors that are now considered borderline cultural industries. As you would see Hesmonda arguing in his book Cultural Industries, right? So things like fashion and sport and food, shoes, jewelry, have all had opportunity to thrive, by extension on account of what goes on in the cultural industries. Sporting goods and services as well, have also benefited. So that is why we say it's like a leading sector. And by extension, as you see, the third point, it can have spillover effects. In other words, it generates then um, returns in other creative industries. So it's like a mutual beneficial cycle that goes on in the cultural economy. Someone involved in music, a Broadway play, for example, generates returns not just in terms of music, but also performance, but also soundstage and lighting, also advertising, and so on and so forth. It has also been observed, and you all are perfect examples of that, that the arts and culture attract a high quality workforce in terms of not the caliber of person who will be involved in the arts and culture, but that it also spurs on investment and business. And last but not least, that it spurs on continuous creativity and innovation across a range of sectors. So all those three ways that we spoke about, by the time we reached the end of the 1990s and the various studies and exercises of measuring that were being done across various countries, it was recognized, we were able to come to a conclusion when you looked at the data across the world, that these were the five main things that we could say about the value of the cultural industries to the cultural economy. So the question therefore is, I would say, why do we measure? And this is one of the things, this is why I say they don't know that they don't know, right? I don't, and I say this unequivocally, whilst there are ministers and cabinets that would imagine, yes, we should probably do a study. I honestly do not believe that they are aware of the importance, the intrinsic role that measuring plays in regard to what I have listed here. It is through measuring that you would clarify industry and sectoral linkages in the local economy. So, Patreon, to you, if we were measuring, we would have known whether or not we should place arts and culture with tourism. And if we were measuring, we would have been able to put forward a better argument towards stakeholders as to why is it at this time, this is the best place to put it. You follow me? Everybody understands me? What I'm saying there?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
To serve particular case studies, because we do not measure, we have consistently, we have no clue as to where we're going wrong, when we're going wrong, why we're going wrong, and how we could fix it, that we would have a stronger development model. So as a result, it becomes a case where Your arts and culture sectors are like ships in the wind, disparate and hoping to continue to sail on the rough seas. So, yes, Quasi, this is the reason why it is almost as if you lump the two together that are like unwanted children because you have not sought to use them as models for better development. Okay? Third, to improve public policy making, really allocation. So you see how it gets no money every year? It gets no money every year because the measuring is not being done. You cannot put money somewhere if you are not measuring. If we take our own private households, do you just get up and jump in the grocery and say, okay, I go spend $3,000 in the grocery or 300? Do you not gauge that on something every month, class? How do you arrive at what you will budget and do? Am I making sense? So again, in the absence of measuring, it means that your public policy can't improve where that is concerned, that you can make better determinations as to what should go where and in what amount and in what timing. And then last but not least, the reason why we have lopsided development with respect to our private sector interest in the arts and culture. And where is it lopsided to, class? Where is private sector's interest mostly where the arts and culture are concerned? Can anybody tell me? Where is it? That's right. Why is that? Because we're not measuring. So we can only, you see, we're not even acting on faith, right? We have to see it. So because we see X amount of people at the airport confused every year around particular time, and the few little hotel you have sold out, and you can't get a rental car, and your place book out, and money spending like rain. All of the money goes in the direction of that particular activity that is bubbling. And I am saying to you, class, if it were not carnival, it would have been another festival. I'm sorry for those of us who love carnival, but that is the reality. Because within the arts and culture, the festival experience has that natural propensity to generate that kind of attention. If you doubt me, ask Antonia in there. That is why theirs was lumped with tourism so long, because Tobago, in the absence of benefiting from an external foreign tourist, they will benefit from a local tourist coming from Trinidad based on whatever heritage or festival inclination they may be offering at any point in time in the year. Any comments? Am I wrong or am I right? Do tell me. Everybody still with me? Let me be sure that I have not lost you all.
Yes,
Yes,
miss.
ma'am.
Hey. And so the question therefore is, how do we go about measuring? And in a sense, you might wonder then, well, if they're not doing anything, why I even have to understand this? And I say this a lot now to people operating in the industries because I do believe in a future where there needs to be more associating, but not in the form that it has happened in the past, not only in the form of associations, but there is need for the creation of industry guilds. Am I still being heard clearly or am I dropping again?
No, miss. Hey, you.
There's need now for associating that comes from an industry and an economic standpoint. Where is our culture and creative economy chamber? Where's that? Where's that? Quasi, Kevon, where's that? Patrian, Jamie, where's that? Where is that? Do you have one?
I don't think we have
I
one. I
don't
think
think
we have
so.
No, you don't.
separated.
No.
No,
I
you
don't
don't.
know.
And who forms that? Do you all have a sensibility as to who is to create that chamber? Who forms that? Is
Well,
it
The person
government?
is in the
there
sector.
are associations that are
Ah,
operating, like NEA and the Drama Association, but I don't think that they have
no,
the
no, Kelly.
know-how for these things.
No, no, no. That is not the same. Notice I asked a particular question. You have the manufacturing association,
Mhm.
but you still have chambers of commerce. Please don't get tired, right? You have to operate past a level of associating in the traditional constructs of association. And I am saying to you all, one of the reasons why this is an important lecture is because you got to know how to do the fishing. Your chamber is what would generate this kind of work. And if you all learn how to do it, it's not like you have to hire a cartel to do it. You would have persons amongst yourselves who can competently do it. Because your chamber is supposed to generate that kind of information in the absence of a government's oversight. Yes, Kwazi? No?
Mike
Or
was just on. No, Mike was just on. Yeah, sorry.
right. Anybody wants to comment on that? Kelly, you appreciate what I'm saying there, right? We're not talking
Yes,
association now.
yes,
Yes.
I do, but I think my point was a little bit lost in there, in that
Right.
if you look at the educational model, we train persons involved in technical and manufacturing and engineering streams to think about economics and measurement and all of those things as a part of it as they come up through the system. But with education, we don't train our artists in the same skills of money management, etc. Um, and industry building, etc., as we come through. So I understand where the shortfall or how the shortfall happens.
But Kelly, I disagree. There was a time
Okay.
argument could have been made, but my
Mhm.
course is sitting down there. Most of the people who you're in class with there took my courses, and you
But
all are here.
your course is at tertiary level.
In addition to that,
That is
So
where the rest learning it. That is where
without
the
the
others are learning it.
without the
yeah,
traditional type of intelligence, right? Without the traditional type of intelligence, which it would sound bad to say, but young artists and even artists in my time, people who are now artists that came up with me, we did not display that type of intelligence, right? So we were not streamlined or moved towards the direction of tertiary education. We had to discover it as an adult.
No, well, I can't argue that fact, but we are in 2020 now, and a day for a long time too.
It
We
there
have,
for a long time, but
have
is
it
it
at
being
Mona. We
funded,
have
etc.?
Yes, ma'am. We have it at Mona. We have it at St. Augustine. We have it at Cave Hill. The OECS. I have done training all through the region.
In
I would
St.
I
in,
would not.
for UWI St. Augustine, I was looking for ACAM for 5 years before it came in. I even applied 2 years, and the course was withdrawn.
That is different, but there was still a program at Mona. There's still one at Cave. There's not Cave Hill. There's one at the Barbados Community College. There were undergrad courses. You see, my point is this. I don't want you to in 2020 you can't make that argument because that is not even it again. We are past that. We are at the place where as long as you are exposed, in other words, you are being given this lecture because you are postgrad and a certain measure of responsibility is being transferred to you. Right? I am teaching you all to fish and you all have to in turn teach others to fish. That is the only way this will see that ripple effect because we are all concerned about how these things connect to development. Not so? This is not somebody else's work to do, I'm afraid. This is our work to do. And so understand that as long as I am running an ACAM, there will be an ACAM happen. This is why the classroom would have been full again, because there are persons who are desirous of the training and of the information. And I'm saying that we're at this place now where we want to take on board these tools and techniques that, in the absence of a government doing, we can certainly equip ourselves with the necessary know-how that we can push forward. Somebody's hand is up. I don't want to ignore who that is. They may speak.
It is me, Tanya.
Yes, head
I was
Tanya.
just I was listening to, I think it was Kelly who was talking, right? And it was just we're talking about it at a tertiary level, but for instance, like I taught arts at a primary school level, right? So when we're talking about this idea of education and development and culture in the arts, like you at some point, like at some level though, like yes, we can do or like put things in place in order to like elevate the culture and the arts, but there is like institutional barriers to it as well. Because if I was lucky to like work in a school where they appreciated art and like we got resources to do that, but in a lot of schools that's not a thing, right? And schools and teachers can only do so much in order to raise capital to be able to have paper or paint or things like that. So like
I appreciate that.
yeah, like you still can't separate that sort of institutional structural barriers towards advancing culture and the arts, because even at that like level of primary education, if you're not showing children how to incorporate that, and they can't see why that's an important part of their education itself, like how can we expect a country to want to also, have value for it?
I appreciate that, and I appreciate that aspect of Kelly's point. But you know what I go in and say. Because I appreciate that, and that is at a particular micro level.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I suppose, in a sense, that I am saying it to you all from the standpoint of you possibly being consultants, or you having your own businesses, or as in the case of some of the others here who work in context of policy. I know it's not everything that they will be able to do, but um, where possible, certainly that you do have the know-how and the understanding. It may be painful because in having the knowledge and you recognize that those who may be your heads, so to speak, who are senior to you, don't have a clue. And it's all how you tell them what your Trinidadians say, stick brick in the air. So I know it may also have that frustration. But certainly, it is important that wherever we can, and as I go through the lecture some more, I do hope that you will have even greater appreciation for it. Because we do no measuring at all. Look at my little example of maracas, right? We simply, it's just not something in us. And I am saying that as arts and cultural and creative entrepreneurs, we do have to begin to develop that capacity, that mind frame, that thinking of always benchmarking and counting and measuring. Because whilst you may not be able to make that difference at the policy level of governance, you can certainly make that difference in your own realm in terms of whatever you may be tasked with or whatever you may be seeking to do as a cultural or creative entrepreneur. So I just want that you will still bear that in mind, notwithstanding, as Tonya and Kelly correctly pointed out, the institutional barriers that can sometimes prevent that. So, how do we measure is really harnessed on, in the first instance, of conceptualizing and classifying the cultural industries. And one can easily see that in terms of, if we're going to count something, we have to know what it is. And so, a very important and foundational element of measuring in this realm is being able to make conceptual sense of the cultural industries. And this usually would involve two key elements: a working definition, a general definition of what constitutes the cultural and creative industries. And there have been many, many, many debates on this. At the point of measuring is not what usually happens is that the definition that is chosen um, tends to be selected based on the policy direction of the government. This is measuring at that level. And I dare say, when I look at sectors, when I do work on behalf of industry associations, the working definition used for their particular sector or cluster tends very much to be harnessed on how they perceive it, so that there is no one definition, which is the point I want you all to understand. It really varies according to the analytical interest and focus of scholars and practitioners, and of course, whatever may be the direction that the government, if it's at the macro level, may be taking on. The other key element in terms of measuring when we talk about making conceptual sense is having a classification scheme or model. So once we have come up with whatever we consider to be a working definition, there is then an attempt to categorize your arts and cultural industries in some sort of framework. And that is important for measuring so that we don't confuse and mix up things. We don't compare apples to oranges, so to speak, which does happen sometimes, by the way. In terms of conceptualizing, there are really three key terms that are used, three labels: creative economy, creative industries, cultural industries, and now you may even see reference to orange economy. Have you heard of this? Have you seen this? This has been a more recent manifestation.
Yeah, we've seen it.
And for you to have a sound understanding of the discussion around the labels that are used, you can simply click on this link right here, this UNESCO report. It's a few years old, but it's very useful for this definition, this discussion, because it takes you through understanding how we would have arrived at these terms and summarizes the debates around these terms. So you don't have to go and read 10, 15 different things. On the issue of working definition, as I was mentioning before again, it can vary from one context to the next as well. So apart from it, apart from it being according to an academic or a scholar's perspective, it also varies according to context, depending on the country, depending on the markets, depending on the focus of those within that country or community. Very much contingent on their realities. And UNCTAD was the one who made this point quite succinctly. So, for example, if we had to speak about copyright industries in Trinidad and Tobago and define it or categorize it, inside of there would be works of mass. But you would not find that in other parts of the Caribbean. You wouldn't see works of mass as being one of the categories or one of the defining points of copyright industries in Jamaica, for example. And so what is important to understand here is that working definitions, the idea of conceptualization as a whole, is very much contingent on your context and your reality. Everybody understands that?
Yes, yes.
Right. Jamie, you are asking about findings, the ones that I put up there. Where can we
Say
access?
that again, sorry.
I saw
Oh no, that was Antonia was asking me that. She was asking me what the mapping exercise and the study you did.
Right,
So I told her
right,
where to put it.
right. That's on your website, I believe. Yes.
Yes,
Right.
it should be there. If it's not there, let me know.
And I should still have a copy of mine somewhere. I'm sure I could find it. I believe I might have a copy of the mapping one too if I dig hard enough. So UNCTAD, because of UNCTAD's earlier point, UNCTAD renders its own definition of the creative industries. I'm not going through this in any detail. I've just put it here for you all to see because the point I want to make here. So for example, I don't know if you're all familiar with what UNCTAD means, United Nations Conference of Trade and Development. So they are interested in trading. And so their definition of creative industries, they don't stop at cultural industries because they're focused on trade. So they want to look at everything that has to do with culture and creativity and the arts and content in terms of going across borders. And so because of that, they generated their definition of the cultural industries to look like this. So when you go into the document where I have the link on the previous slide, you will see that definitions will vary according to the focus of the particular entity that is rendering the definition. So UNCTAD has its own definition, UNESCO's definition. UNESCO is more focused on heritage and education tied with culture. Their definition will be different. WIPO, who is concerned with intellectual property and copyright, their definition will be different. And when you look across notable ministries across the world, like London's, England's Ministry to do with the Arts and Culture, they're known as DCMS, Department of Culture, Media, and I think it's Sport. Their definition of culture and creative industries will be different to Australia's, different to Ireland, different to Canada. And so I encourage you to take a look at those. I encourage you to take a look at those elements that you would have a sense of how it may vary. It's nothing to learn, but just that you can appreciate the different nuances and how it is policy informs these definitions and how sometimes the definitions created by the global institutions inform how various governments across the world would create their own definitions for their cultural and creative industries. Is everyone still with me? Clear so far?
See here and as you go on.
Oh my goodness, I dipped again.
No, miss, we still hearing you.
All right, okay, great.
You were fading in and out just now, but I'm hearing you now.
Okay, oh boy. I'm hoping it's on the recording properly. So this that I have here now is an example of classification scheme, and this is one of the more popular ones that was created, a concentric circles model. And this is our guy. This is his, David Throsby. So you could certainly now see where his philosophizing on cultural value would have led him to. So this is, he would have done this work for the European Union, if I remember correctly. So this is how he
Dr. Tal, excuse.
yes, losing me again.
Dr. Tal,
Yes, hello.
your
Yeah,
slide doesn't show the concentric circles.
it's not showing that,
Yeah, the slide words UNCTAD's definition still.
and I've changed it.
I am
Are you?
seeing
I
I
was
am
seeing the
seeing circles.
circles.
Okay, so Jamie, check your connection now. This thing is contagious.
I
Oh
think
my.
Okay then.
I think Teams has an upgrade because earlier I wasn't seeing the slides moving and I had to come out and come back in.
Oh, that is Janae. I did see when
Yes,
you come back in.
yes, yes.
Jamie, you want to go out and come back in? Let's. Something. Somebody's mic is on. Can you turn it off? Do I have to put that- Everybody still hearing me? Or have I dipped?
We're still hearing you.
Okay, I'm back and I'm seeing it now.
Okay, you're seeing it now. Awesome. Okay, I see my Wi-Fi doing some kind of strangeness, but you all are still hearing me? Nope, they're not.
Yeah. Yeah, we're still hearing.
Wow, strange.
Yeah, I'm hearing.
Yeah, start to do some kind of monkey pants there, but we go in. Right. So I'm saying to you, this was Throsby's hmm, I know they're not hearing me now because I'm not seeing.
We're still hearing you.
That's strange, and it dipped,
Yeah, I'm hearing as well.
Right. So I'm saying to you, this was what Throsby would have created. He calls it the concentric circles model, and he basically argues that, and David Hesman that takes off from that argument as well, talks about core, other core, and related non-core. So that Throsby uses this to make the case that one can speak about culture and creative industries, and you can classify them according to the extent to which they are engaged with the arts and culture. And so if you can see, I don't know how well you can see the diagram, but when you get the slides, you will be able to see it clearer. It is categorized as such: cultural expression, then he has creative. So creative industries for him tends to refer to those that engage in a lot of production, that the production cycle that we would have learned about through Duguay is very critical and pivotal to whatever they are generating. But not only that, that they not only are involved in cultural expression, but in other realms of creativity. Everybody understands that? And based on Throsby's model, there's also the work foundation. So what I've basically placed there are some examples of these classification schemes that you can see what they look like. I think I am not seeing one of my slides, but that's okay. I'm going to continue. Since the time when these have emerged, important to understand, class, that with the continual emergence of measuring on the cultural and creative economy, as we would have discussed in terms of the waves, so too one would find greater attention was being paid to the ways in which, the various ways in which we could define segments of the cultural and creative in the economy. And so these now basically reflect all of the various definitional concepts out there now used to characterize or define the cultural and creative economy, or aspects of the cultural and creative economy. And again, like I keep saying, these tend to be used according to the perspective or the point of departure by the analysts or whoever they've been hired by, or the government. An experience economy, for example, would be looking at something like entertainment and also including tourism more than likely. So it depends on the, so for example, now, Jamie, if a study has to be done for the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts now, chances are of all of these, it would have to be looking at it as the experience economy. Do you get that? Do you appreciate that?
Definitely, yes, definitely.
And that is not to say that in looking at it as the experience economy, that the arts are lost, because I think we would all appreciate, and certainly me working at DCFA, I have grown to appreciate that cultural expression is part of offering or giving someone an experience. So it depends on the way in which you allow yourself to fully articulate what these terminologies mean. And therefore, class, if I may put a plug in for my course, that is why a course like this is so important. Because if you have an appreciation for the things that we have learned so far in the course, then in looking at any of these, you are able to give a strong justification for why you might define something in the way that you do, and by extension, then why you may map, which is the term that we use, why you may map a particular culture or creative economy in a particular way to fully reflect what experience economy means for you. Does everybody appreciate what I'm saying there?
Yes, and if I may, can I put a plug? Well,
Yes.
on the Ministry's tourism page on Facebook, they have a little, not a competition, but it's a series of videos where they're teaching you about tourism and me basically, and there's a quiz after where they ask you, what did you learn about tourism, and how does it apply to your experience basically?
Interesting.
Yeah, so
Oh,
that's one step in that.
that's very
Yeah.
interesting. I'll tell you what. When Barbados decided to pursue tourism as a serious industry, that was one of the platforms of their campaign. This thing about saying tourism is our business. Look, I still know it. And how many years I've left Barbados now? Tourism is our business. Let's play our part. If I tell you how long that was the policy focus. And what they did was, and I think this is something that I suppose Trinidad and Tobago tends to fall short on for whatever reason, um, is that when that decision was made, training was incorporated into the Barbados Community College, which is like your COSTAT. So people learned about the hospitality sector. They were exposed to training programs who wanted to get into that sector. We have training programs on how to be a bartender, how to be a chef, how to be a sous chef, how to be waiter, waitress, housekeeper, and all the various grades. Because if you look at the National Training Agency's list of standards and qualifications, tourism is very extensive inside of there for that reason. Because, of course, Barbados, Jamaica, St. Lucia in particular, Grenada, would have argued for the need for the creation of those kinds of standards that persons who may not necessarily pursue, as to use Kelly's term, the traditional realms of knowledge or education, could go in those avenues and, of course, still be professionals. So that, again, it comes back down to how you see your policy focus or your policy impetus that will drive your attitude and aptitude towards your cultural and creative industries where measuring is concerned. It's like you really have to want it, so to speak, for want of a better way of putting it. So I think I would have covered this already on the issue of classification schemes. They tend to be influenced by the conceptual models and try to give you a strict parameter to allow you to measure fairly well. So this is an example of a classification scheme here. I believe this is UNCTAD's. So again, you look at UNCTAD's, you wouldn't see UNESCO having this. I remember years ago attending a workshop that the UNESCO Institute of Statistics had put on. The then head of the CFA, that would have been Roy Gibbons, sent me on this thing. And it was UNESCO wanted to get the various institutions in the region to utilize what would have been their framework, their classification scheme for the arts and culture. Jamie, I don't think you all would have graduated yet. I suspect I might have been teaching you all then. But they wanted the region to take on board their classification scheme as opposed to UNCTAD. And so they ran this workshop in Jamaica. where they invited all of us who were into measuring and whatnot, and people from the statistical departments and ministries of culture, where you would come and talk about your experiences with measuring, as well as to use the classification scheme that they had, and to be able to discuss and share with them what would be the challenges of implementing it, what could be implemented, and what could be left out. And I recall a particular colleague of mine was there. And at that time, this classification scheme that you see here before us was becoming like the popular one. You know, that happens sometimes. Something is trendy. So this was the favorite guy at that time. And that was because digitization was increasingly becoming important. And so you were looking at a case where exports now wasn't just tangible. And at that time, we were, when that workshop was on, we were moving out of the realm of CDs. People were beginning to store music on flash drives and that kind of thing. Digital loading had already started. And that particular colleague and friend of mine stood up in the people's thing. I was saying that the model, meaning the UNESCO one, was outdated, and it didn't take into full consideration digitization and whatnot. Oh Lord, I don't need to tell you all how those people felt. They were not pleased at all. But the point of giving you that little tidbit is to show you that there's also politics involved in the idea of a classification scheme and what is used. Naturally, if you are getting funding from one agency as opposed to the other, that particular industry that is giving you the funding will expect that you will use their model. So, from a global standpoint, on this slide here, you see the 6 major classification schemes that are used. That same link that I gave you on the previous slide, when you go into that book, that document, that publication, you will also see a discussion on each one of these. So I'm not going to take up our time to discuss each one in detail. You see DCMS model, the same DCMS I was telling you all about. And as a matter of fact, DCMS's model is the only model here that comes from a government agency. All the rest of these are, you could say, global. The Americans for the Arts model, well, that is the only one now that represents what I was talking about before, about moving beyond being associations to operating as chambers then, or industry advocacy groups. So this is an industry advocacy group here, this number 6. They would have created, this is their model. This is what they argue for. Everybody understands that? There was a time when Trinidad and Tobago would have their classification scheme too, because based on we have music TT, film TT, and what else do we have? Do we have fashion TT?
Yes, on Fashion TT.
Right. So in a sense, Trinidad and Tobago has narrowed their focus to those 3 in a sense. And I remember before the dispensation of the creative TTs, when it was not IDCO, was the one I had recommended.
IDCO, and then creative, and then TTN, Trinidad and Tobago Entertainment Company.
So, TTN is the one that was created, that came out of when I did the strategic plan, how much ever donkey years ago. And I remember under them at one particular time, photography was being pushed up as a sector more so than
Yes.
Theater or some madness. So it was
Yes,
crazy.
photography, photography, film, and literary work.
Yes, it totally blew my mind.
Along with music.
But it
Along with
had,
music, yeah.
it's politics. It had to do with who was the board composition and what their interest was, you see. And so this is why I say, class, it's important that we as creative entrepreneurs and creative workers, that we have an understanding of these frameworks, that should we have to do that own count for ourselves, we can do so. um, and it's of course important that you could continue to have an understanding. You can use these models as well to locate your business, to see where you situate. And that's very important, especially when you have to go for big funding. Because if you had to get funding from UNESCO, you would certainly need to know where your business locates within that classification model, so to speak. So let us look at how do we measure in terms of approaches and models. And foundational here is that you need to have an understanding of the terminology that is used. So you would see right there at the start, we have mapping. And mapping is where you literally count. And this is one that all of us here can do, right? Literally count. You know, how many people work in my micro enterprise, how many of them are full-time, how many part-time, how many voluntary, um, what is the potential market size out there for me to hire other people, how many students are graduating from the university who I may need to access in my business. At the macro level, mapping exercises. So the one that Jamie mentioned before that Antonia asked about, Dr. Birthday one, where she literally counts how many institutions we have out there in theater, how many dance schools, how many dance associations, um, what makes up culture here, and so on and so forth. That is a mapping, and she's very much known for mapping. She's going to do one very soon, identifying all of these spaces that are used for arts, culture, and entertainment across the region. So mapping is where you literally count and you identify where it is, what it is, where it is, what it used for, and how many. Right? I don't really do mapping. If I have to, I will. This is where I fall now, impact assessment. And this is where we try to determine what is the worth of value, what is the significance of the particular sector or groups of sectors to your economy. And working in the CFA, to continue my little story, working around cultural practitioners, my idea of impact now has moved away from sole economics to be what I like to call socioeconomic impacts. So I also like to try to measure things like literacy in some regards, if I can. I also like to measure qualitative stuff like people's preference for certain things to do with their own arts and culture. Local sentiment, I think, is important. So not just to gauge foreign exchange, not just to gauge employment. I like to count how many educational programs we have in that area, how many people doing those programs, and so on and so forth. So impact assessment, and the purpose of impact assessment is, of course, to be able to convince any government or cabinet that this is worth investing in. Impact assessments also tend to have within them something we call ROI, which I believe you would have learned through Nicole Joseph, return on investment. So we like to also do a particular formula to show you, well, this is the amount of money that you would have put in to this particular sector at this period of time, and this is what it generated on account of you as a government investing in it. So impact assessments you would find are popularly used in the region to gauge festivals, so that Carnival is always done. We've done impact assessments on Blue Food Festival. We've done on Tobago Jazz. I don't believe one has ever been done on Heritage Festival. Antonia, you could correct me. Um, I don't believe one has ever been done on the regional carnivals. On their own, carnival tends to be the major focus. Economic impact assessment done on Masquerade already too. I remember that. Professor Janet Vanas James did one looking at the economics of, yes, the carnival masquerade, as he called it, industry. He did that. And so we also have within their economic contribution, that terminology, meaning what does it contribute to the economy, and of course economic size in terms of how many For example, we're talking employment, how many people working in a particular sector. Economic size can also refer to how much money is generated within a sector. Economic size can also refer to how many companies are operating in a particular sector, how many entrepreneurs are operating in a particular sector. And so these are generally the four main kinds of terminology that you would find floating around when we are talking about measuring. Any questions or comments about that? Anyone? I see someone's hand up. I don't know if that was up from before. Everybody's clear? Everybody's still with me, or have I dipped again?
We're still with
Now
you.
we're here.
All right. Okay, so the broad approaches that tend to be used to measure, and y'all in postgrad, so you would know this to some degree from having to do research in undergrad. Qualitative analysis. What is qualitative analysis again? Anyone? Let's see who remembers these things. What is a qualitative analysis? Who hasn't talked for the day? Where's Ava? I ain't hear Ava for the day. Is she here? And where's Dominique? Haven't heard certain people for the day yet. What is qualitative analysis? What's that again? Anyone? Nobody knows or remembers?
This is a research method that uses like more subjective means of trying to collect data, so interviews or non-quantifiable means of collecting data.
Come on, Tanya, you could do better than that. What is
This
qualitative analysis?
what else could
You're
I
okay, but
like?
come on now. Huh?
Yeah, simple one.
Yeah, so like what so? I mean, yes, we have situational analysis there, but what would qualitative focus on? Where are all these people I teach before? They don't let me call you out, you know. Roxanne and Jamie and yes, Patreon.
Like cycles. Oh, sorry.
No, Jamie, go ahead.
Patreon, you done put up your hand. You might as well go brave. You done jumping already.
My understanding of it, qualitative has to do with like how you say situation, like what it is, like the situation or the object or the event itself being studied, and quantitative has to do with more of a numerical too. So you're looking at like how much or how many, whatever you'll be studying. That's like my understanding of it.
Right. And that is why Tonya said qualitative is non-quantitative, because she wanted to emphasize the fact that with qualitative assessment, it is not based on numbers. But I just didn't want her to use back the non-quantitative, but she was correct. Right? Qualitative analysis is where the analysis or the assessment is not based on numbers, but rather we would engage in analytical tools or approaches such as observation. So if you notice, you see myself and nurse's name here. I even update, I should have put some more, but we up to 2018, 2019, we do a study, and right now I'm doing Barbados crop over. So combination of the above is normally how we would do an economic impact assessment, where we do quantitative and qualitative. So that's one of the joys of my work. I get to see the carnival. I get to see the festival. So we use observation as well to gauge some of the analysis to be able to complete situational assessment. So qualitative analysis tends to be like your strategic analysis. So you've heard of things like SWOT analysis. You've heard about environmental analysis, meaning like your PESTLE and your SLEP analysis and these things. And you will learn those next year when you have class with Mrs. McNichol Stevenson, when you do strategy, right? But qualitative, the term situational means that you are surveying the context then. Another word that sometimes is used is contextual analysis, and you are more concerned about being able to describe and based on that description to analyze what you see before you, but not much concerned with the numbers because you're trying to arrive at analysis that helps you to understand why things may be the way they are. So when we are measuring, an important element of qualitative analysis is background analysis or background context to be able to understand how a sector emerged, what would have been some of the things that has made it grow from strength to strength, what are some of the key trends operating in the sector, what are some of the challenges that the sector may be experiencing, what are some of the opportunities emerging out of the sector. All of that would represent or would constitute qualitative analysis. And quantitative, as was just correctly contrasted, is where we're dealing with the numbers. So this is where you run a survey, we literally count, right? And this is where the surveys will come in. So the tourism data will be quantitative. When I did the money flow study, that will be quantitative. That was mostly quantitative. And then, of course, we have a combination of the above, as I say, where we utilize the two strands of analysis to be able to render what we consider to be a more holistic picture of the sectors. So these are some examples, and I have put these here. They are older, but these are some of the more comprehensive ones. Within your course outline, you will see some of the more recent studies there as well. But I have put these here as two of the more landmark studies that were done over time, that you would have an understanding of how they were done in the earlier years, since the 2000s decade. I didn't carry you way back, but if you Google Australia's cultural industries or Canada's, you will see some of the even earlier studies, but I didn't put those there. Right? And these are just some of the examples. A videotape still in here? That needs to come out. These are just some of the examples of what we do measure. So we literally count. And as I said to you, class, we are at a place where in the region we don't even do this. So again, if we fell under the category of a chamber, these are some of the things that we would do, or guild, because they would have to continue to keep track. I know that the Ministry of Culture, or I don't know what they call now, the Culture Division, would have some of this because of the Cultural Registry. But can I ask you, Jamie, what do you all do with that registry? Do you all generate data based on that registry? Or it's just...
Right now, it's operating more like a directory. The data we would like to generate, well, yeah. No, we don't. In short answer, no, we don't generate specific data. But
I
data
would
to help us develop programs. We do use the data to help us develop programs.
Okay, well, that's a start. That's good, but you don't use it to necessarily count, do you? Do you all know to do that? You should be able to do that.
Yeah, not necessarily. No, we don't use it to necessarily count. That's right. Yeah.
I will come and...
Yeah, the fields.
Right. So you see that. So you see that's an example already. But you can use that registry to count. Can anybody
Yes,
hazard
we can.
how you might? Anybody else here is registered? I'm sure many of them here are registered. Are they? Patrian and
I hope so. I don't know.
Patrian and
Yes.
I don't know. I will have to have them put up again.
Actually,
Antonia should be.
I was looking into
Quasi registered. James, you registered. Kevon, you registered.
James should be by now. Kevon is.
Yeah, I am registered.
Registered.
I'm registered as well.
Dominic, you went and registered. I tell you do that long time. Antonia, you registered. It's all
Yes.
on your... I don't know here. No, can you registered? Well, what trouble is it, Maria? You registered?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
Maria registered. Hands up, who registered?
I hear some silence here that have me trouble. So you see the information at hand. You see the
Five.
good?
Did I put my hand up?
Yes, I see
So
Six.
that
Okay.
Yeah.
hand up.
Tillman.
I hear
Eight. James. Okay. Good. Half the class.
so
So
you
the
see
rest of
the
you all, your
Happy
info.
man.
so check it now. I have an
It should
idea
have
of
been
what
everybody.
it should have been everybody. And I have a fair idea of what some of the things they ask about in there. But they could use that to count. Because they could say, based on that registry, the number of artists according to category living in are going on show off. Let me see if I could remember some of these parishes. St. George, and that's all I remember because I think I live in St. George. What's another parish here?
You mean
Victoria,
our
y'all have one
counties?
like that?
Victoria, St. Patrick, Victoria, St. Patrick, St. George.
Not parishes, it's
St.
counties.
George
Right.
counties, yeah. St. George is split into two, into St. George East and St. George West. Yeah, I can't remember the rest of them.
Right. But you could do that. You could do a mapping exercise based on the registry alone to show where artists live, where artists are based in number, to see where is the high population, high concentration. Then you could also look at the registry and count to see how many artists operating from home or how many have the business one place and they live in somewhere else. All of that is data.
Yeah,
Who
so we actually have
and
that thought. We actually have that thought, Dr. Tull, and the proposal is being written because we have to do everything through a proposal.
proposal there right for that? Look, all your good, yes? You know,
Yeah, that's
at all.
what?
I'm not trying to muddy anybody's water, but I will sit down and eat some popcorn and just watch and count and send that back in an Excel file. Really, a proposal is being written for that. Oh wow. So class,
Well, yeah.
you see the point I was making about the fact that we don't know and we don't know that we don't know. And we don't understand the importance, the simplicity of measuring. um, we don't realize the literal counting should be an everyday thing. And I get the fact that some of us here still don't appreciate it because I didn't know the slight resistance to when I said that, some of this you all can do. And it's because in your mind, measuring is this very onerous, very big and major kind of mystical exercise that people like Dr. Tal and Dr. Burke and Dr. Nurse do. I am not saying that they are not measuring exercises that may require a consultant or an academic who is versed in that area. I'm not saying no. But the truth is, class, we can measure every day. There are everyday aspects of the arts and culture that we can count that would go a long way towards generating the databases that we need so that then the higher level exercises wouldn't be so difficult. Every time I have to do an impact assessment, I have to literally count. Now that I know you all have that registry, I'm going to ask you all for some data sometimes. When I say, now that I know that it is designed in that way that you could pull the data, but it should be. It really should be. And so on any given month, one can generate a report to even say if you've had growth on the registry in terms of the number of new people and whether they're male or female and what is the age group and what is the sector they're working in and so on. It's really in these ways that we would be able to create policy in a more meaningful way. In the Caribbean, this is the kind of analysis that we have so far. And to talk about the challenges, I will just refer you all to an article that I wrote. What did I call that? You can check on my academia edu site. I believe I have it there. Challenges, something I talked about measuring. One of the papers I have there on measuring. Um, I will try and see if I can find the link for the other one, which would have fallen under the Sir Sridhar Ramphal Center for Trade at Cave Hill. Just Google Joantal challenges with measuring in the cultural and creative industries, and it should come up. But I know I do have either slide presentation or brief article on my Academia EDU site, so you can check it there as well. That you can have a succinct understanding of the challenges that we continue to face in terms of measuring in the region. But apart from that, these are the four kinds of assessments that happen in the region. I want to do raise the issue that policy is ill-informed in a sense because we don't do a lot of measuring. I would like to get some feedback on that. What do you think about that? So I am placing here on the table that policy with respect to the arts and culture in the region, in Trinidad and Tobago, let's deal with here, is ill-informed because it is often done in the absence of consistent measuring. Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you do agree, say why. If you don't agree, say why. Let's see who I can have. Who hasn't said a word yet for the day? Or typed? Can I get someone's perspective on that? Is everybody hearing me still, or y'all have lost me?
Yeah, repeat the question, please, Dr. Tal.
Right.
Policy is ill-informed.
Policy is ill-informed because it is not supported by consistent measuring. Right? So policy is ill-informed in the arts and culture because it is not supported or buttressed by consistent measuring. So I'm saying, do you agree? Do you disagree? And whichever one, say why you agree or why you disagree. Everybody heard me now?
Yes, miss.
Tell me, Antonia. You talk first. Go ahead. Sorry?
I agree with that statement. Mainly because the fact that we still have the view that culture, that the creative or cultural economy does not make or generate any profits or profits, I believe is due to the fact that they're just not doing the research to see that is not true.
I want to pick up on Antonia's point before I have someone else answer the main question there. She said something quite interesting, and I have forgotten about that to some degree. Why is it that there's still this idea that the arts and culture do not generate profits? I mean, this falls in the realm of our course. Why do you think that is, or what are some of the factors that contribute to that? Yes, Kelly. Let me see if I can pull you up there. I'm seeing you messaging in the chat. I'm not getting it though. Are y'all still hearing me, or y'all have lost me again?
We could hear you.
No, I'm hearing.
Right. Kelly is saying, before our current green paper, I would have wholeheartedly agreed. No, not so much. So this is with respect to which part? The question I asked us in terms of what Antonia said?
Yes, the original question, because our cultural policy is at green paper now. And it was, there were a whole lot of town meetings around getting the stakeholders information and things like that.
Right. But what I said was, it is ill-informed because it is not buttressed and supported by consistent measuring. So the getting of the information and all of that is one thing, but measuring, this is in the context of what we just learned here, right? We heard from Jamie the last time we had one of these analyses done. So somewhere in 2014 was a mapping, and I honestly don't remember when I did the money flows. That might have been like that might have been around the same time, I think she did hers in 2014. I might have done mine in 2015 or
You
vice.
would have been 2015, 2016, I believe.
You
You would have
see?
bridged. You'd have bridged 2015 and 2016, I think. Yeah.
So last time something so was done in 2015 would have been mine. You sure? It had nothing else. And then Vanis James did the carnival industry, I think maybe in 2017. You see? So we're talking about the measuring, not that you don't get stakeholders input, Kelly, but we're talking about measuring in the context of what we were just discussing here, what we learned and we discussed today in class. So I was asking the question just as a follow-up from what Antonio was saying. Why is it that there's still this idea that you don't profit from the arts and culture? What is that stemming from? Does anyone have a perspective on that? Anybody?
To to be honest, I just think it's just the lack of measurement, like you were talking about earlier, because I don't know, like as an artist, like I grew up with the whole back in the day notion of struggling artists, they don't make money from that. But when I started exhibiting, like I found the exact opposite.
Right.
When I saw like exactly how much money some art pieces go for, and that they're very much sold, and and
Yeah.
like I realized that that mindset is completely false. And then you could see it too in carnival and whatever. So I
Mm-hmm.
just think it's just lack of measuring
Mm,
the capabilities or the profits that come out from the art
right.
sector.
And I appreciate that. And I was hoping that that is what would be said. It's, in other words, then, class, it's almost like a chicken and egg scenario. Yes, Jenny, you may contribute. Go ahead.
Yes, Miss. Well, this is my personal experience. I think that measuring is not totally difficult to do in the arts, but like artists don't even measure their own stuff. So how
Yes.
we as as a industry
Yeah.
and the whole gonna measure everybody now? Because like they don't take note of what their expenses, how much money they make, and all these kind of things.
Yes, yes, yes. And this is where Kelly was trying to make her point before. But I'm saying we in 2020 we kind of shift from that because the numerous workshops are held, and I mean, as usual with everything, we wouldn't get everybody. Everyone will not receive and do what they should. But at the same time, we have come a long way from like what Kelly was saying in terms of how it was back in the day and when we first started off. But your point is quite correct, Janae. We have to reach that place where we recognize. So, for example, in some parts of the world, being part of the artist registry, they would be required to submit data. They have to go up on the website and put in the information and that kind of thing. And in so doing, they help contribute to the respective ministries being able to keep data and keep track of the sector to know what is really going on. Yeah, somebody else's hand is up. I'm not sure who it is. I'm not.
Dr.
Yeah.
Tal, Alicia here.
Yes.
I was just thinking that apart from the dirt of measuring, what about when it is actually done and there's a distrust by persons working in the sector to give accurate information? Because I think when Dr. Burke had done her mapping exercise, what she discovered is that most cultural artists and cultural workers were reticent to give concrete figures on how much they made.
Yes.
I don't know if they felt that if they were honest with those that were conducting the exercise, if they felt that the government would not have invested or given them, monies for the grants that they typically ask for. Um, although cultural grants are very few and far between. But I do remember that Dr. Burke had indicated that in her study that she found that that these cultural workers were very reticent in giving accurate information on
Right.
their earnings, etc.
Yes, and there are many reasons for that. That is one. Some don't like to pay taxes, so they believe that if it is that they give out that information, that the tax man will come a calling. Some of it is that some of them may be ashamed to say what they do make or don't make, and so they would sometimes disguise it. And so this is why sometimes in the context is not in all aspects of the arts and culture you'll be able to do it, but certainly in the case of festivals, this is why I like to attend the festival, and I can see for myself, so that when sometimes I'm being given numbers or figures, I've seen it, so I can gauge. You politely accept what is being said, but I can certainly gauge for myself because I would have been there, and I would have a fair idea of what is really the reality, if you can appreciate what I'm saying. And so that those are some very crucial points that are made there. And the question therefore is, how do we get around that in terms of measuring? How do we still render a quality exercise in light of what was just suggested there? Can I hear anyone? What would be a suggestion? How can we work around those kinds of challenges?
Miss, sorry, could you repeat the question real quickly, please?
Yes, how can we work around those kinds of challenges that we just discussed there in terms of measuring where, for example, members of the sector may not trust and do not give the information accurately or at all? How do we work around that? Is it possible to work around that? How are we able to still give a quality mapping exercise then, or a quality economic impact assessment? What can we do? What? That's
Yeah,
it.
I think a lot of it has to do with early engagement. I find that when the government reaches out, it's usually after they would have formulated whatever policy document, and after they want, then they want the input of
Mhm.
the practitioners.
Right.
So it's after the fact, as
Yeah.
opposed to getting the practitioners involved, from the ground and
Mhm.
building that trust. I find
Right.
that we tend not to do that.
That's very. You should say that. Of all the studies that I have variously done, the only one where I had that experience was the same one that ended up creating TNT ends, where not only did we move around um, and met with practitioners very early on, sometimes them coming to the ministry, sometimes we going out. But the Minister of Culture, Joan Yulee Williams, also ensured that we had a session at St. Anne's, where I was able to workshop them and what have you. And those things do make a difference. And so it meant then that I had gathered the data, but I had their buy-in in terms of when I rendered the findings, we could have brainstormed together as to what should be the direction taken. And so by the time then the recommendations were laid in Parliament, it was not a surprise because they would have contributed to what was there in the document. So I accept what you're saying in that regard. I've had experience of that. When the practitioner is involved, the creative worker and people who are in the industry, very early on in the exercises, one tends to find them to be a little more willing. That is not to say that you don't get recalcitrance of some because of the same issues that we raised not too long ago about not wanting to disclose figures. But in research, we have something called triangulation, and we try to use it, in the sense that if we don't get it one way, we will gauge the information in another direction. So sometimes we may ask people for a range or a ballpark figure, and then from there we try to work it backwards, so to speak. But those are some very good examples and good information. Okay, so to close off class, what I would want for you all to do, that for those of us especially who are not very familiar with this area, um is that you would get two Caribbean examples of measuring exercises, studies that were done, and you would look for one of the early studies and one that is more recent, and identify ways in which the studies have remained similar and ways in which they differ. Certainly, to do that, really look at three things: why they measure, what they measure, and how they measure. And that is where you will pick up the similarities and the differences. Why is that important to do? Again, this is to reinforce, and this is not nothing to take up all your time. You're just doing a quick scan and you take a look and try to understand. And this is going to come back in handy, I would well imagine, when you do policy next year as a course. This is to understand the way in which sometimes the approach to measuring can shift depending on what, as we said before, what is the intention of the government or the intention of whoever has hired the consultant to do the work, and of course how there may be shifts or growth in the sector over time, where one may see that there's greater focus or emphasis on one thing now in the 2020s decade as opposed to something else in the earlier years. So you would want to get your two examples just that you will be able to make that point, particularly in terms of what we would have discussed earlier when we first looked at the point about definitions and classification schemes and what have you. Everybody's clear on that?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes,
Okay, great. So I think if there are no other questions or comments, I believe we can close off here today. We get off a little early this evening. Anyone has any questions, any comments, anything else?
Miss, in relation to our essay, when can we expect to get comments back from you from what we submitted last week?
Right. So I will give some feedback before the end of the week and have you all on your merry way. I believe I reviewed one and sent off one. I have one or two to email out that I started already. I know I sent out one already for sure. So I will finish those, and before the end of the week, you will receive those and you can proceed.
So Dr. Tull, are you shifting the deadlines?
Yes, more than likely I will do so. Don't panic. That's why all you're so quiet today. All you're studying yesterday.
Yeah, the first draft.
Yes, yes, I am.
We got the first draft on Friday. So if you're saying that you're shifting, thank you so much.
I go check. I always. Sorry, someone else is saying something.
I said thank you very much, miss, because I was nervous.
Well, I realize how Pauline talking today. All you studying, I say for real. No man, the work will get done, but you had to learn. You had to take in the information to it. No, I would shift it. I wouldn't leave you all to try to do a draft for Friday, because one or two of you I know had some little challenges. I know how it goes. I know trying to go to school in this environment is could be a little taxing, especially if your job is requiring a lot of you. So I kind of try to go with the flow. As a matter of fact, our faculty is encouraging us to do that, to try our best to be very cognizant of how you may be facing your challenges where that is concerned. But that don't mean all you go submit my work late, right? I go and shift the deadline, but work with me still because we do have some other things that we need to get done. Agreed?
Yes, miss.
All right, great. All right. So I will extend the deadline. I will send out a general message about it. I'll probably put it in the WhatsApp if you don't mind. I believe everybody is there. Yes? And I will send you your review. I know I've emailed one already, so some people will actually get their review tonight because I have some I finished, but I just didn't get a chance to email them because I do review them in batches. All right, but by the end of the week, everybody should have theirs, and I will also indicate what is the new deadline date. Everybody is able to see the chat here in the Teams, right? On our Teams platform. I'm always nervous to put things there sometimes. We are all able to see it.
No, I don't see the chats on the Teams platform. But I do get the WhatsApp messages and so forth. So I keep up with everybody via the WhatsApp message.
So send it there. Right? And yes, Antonia will look for the studies and send it for you. I was supposed to have that because those would have been done on your behalf, this where you are. But I'll look for them. I believe I do have them.
Written book, and they had no clue about it. Nobody had a clue. That's why I'm asking you
It's
now.
under Bloom Consulting. It's not under my name and nurse's name. We did it under Bloom, so I don't know if that's why. But you're still in seeing it. Nobody knows about it.
No, they don't know about any study being done. They don't have a clue. I asked.
Glenda Rose, don't know anything about that, Antonia? Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. Glenda's supposed to know about that.
That is not my boss, eh? But those events that Miss mentioned is under our purview as Tobago First Nation.
Yeah.
But we have never seen it, which is why I was so shocked when you said that you did one.
Yeah, I write a paper too. I presented that at CSA some 2 years ago. Actually, I presented at Carrie Festa too. Just gone here. Yes, I will look for them. They're around somewhere. I will find them. And I believe since then, but I think he sent me something else too that he worked on. So that's very strange. Yeah. Okay. I'll dig up for them for you. Don't worry. Okay, class. So it's been great being here. I wish you all a good evening, and you can look out for your email from me on your essay. Have a good evening, everybody, and bye. Thank you for your attention, and I'll see you all next week.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Everybody.